Jamie Raskin didn't just debate Jim Jordan, he dismantled him in front of the entire country. Jordan came in swinging with his fiery defense of the First Amendment, insisting that fact-checking is nothing more than censorship by experts. He painted himself as the fearless defender of free speech, the voice in Congress standing up to so-called government overreach. But what he didn't expect was Raskin flipping the script, praising him sarcastically as the Voltaire of Congress before unleashing a devastating reality check. Raskin reminded everyone that when Donald Trump was in power, free speech wasn't protected, it was punished.
Some closing remarks, and then I'll close.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for a fascinating hearing, and all of our colleagues and the witnesses for hanging with us. I taught constitutional law and the First Amendment for 25 years, Mr. Chairman, and I used to tell my students that the First Amendment's like an apple, and everybody wants to take one bite out of the apple. Somebody doesn't like left-wing speech, take a bite. Somebody doesn't like right-wing speech, take a bite. Somebody doesn't like DEI speech, take a bite. Somebody doesn't like gender ideology speech, take a bite. And everybody takes just one bite out of the apple, and at the end of it, you know what's left? Nothing. The apple's gone. It's been gobbled away, which means that we've got a responsibility to defend free speech in its entirety. Now, the hearing we've had today has been fascinating in a lot of ways. I do think that it ran roughshod over some basic constitutional distinctions that we do talk about in the First Amendment, like whether we're in a public forum or a non-public forum, a limited public forum, a private space, and all of that somewhat got stampeded in the political theatrics at different points. But one thing that struck me was the fundamental agnosticism I hear from a lot of my colleagues about whether something called the truth even exists anymore. And we are the products of an Enlightenment constitution by people who really believed in the idea of facts and empirical investigation. In fact, our entire judicial system is based on that idea. When people go and testify in court, they swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then we have whole standards of evidence that are organized around whether or not the case has been made. In criminal court, have you been able to prove the facts so intensely that it's beyond any reasonable doubt? Or in civil court, by a preponderance of the evidence. And so our judicial system is based on the idea that there is the truth. If you think about it, Mr. Chairman, our democratic system is based on the idea that there's the truth. I heard people today and in other contexts saying, well, no, we don't want to take down Russian disinformation on social media sites telling people to go and vote on Wednesday, November 9th, if the election is Tuesday, November 8th. That's a violation of free speech, as opposed to just a lie and a fraud perpetrated on the public. But think about it. We don't have democracy if we don't have a concept of truth and the facts, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump might not like it, but there is an election and somebody wins and somebody loses, and he couldn't handle the fact that he lost in 2020 for whatever reasons, financial, ideological, psychological, emotional, I don't know. He lost by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the election. And the vexed politics and the divided, polarized culture of our time all has to do with his inability to accept that, and then his inciting a violent mob to come and attack our police officers and wound them and hospitalize them and tear the country apart. But the reality is, at the end of every election, we decide the fact of who won and who lost. And the inability to accept facts and the idea that there are truths is a very dangerous thing for American democracy or any other democracy. And I'll just say finally, Mr. Chairman, there's an attack going on the media. I'm sorry that some of my colleagues didn't deal with the fact that, yes, President Trump has started to ban this media entity, to punish these various newspaper groups, to bring lawsuits for tens of millions of dollars on totally bogus, fraudulent defamation charges, and then forcing those media entities to settle with him as a form of financial and political tribute to the state. What is this? Castro's Cuba? North Korea? Come on. Could we get together on a bipartisan basis to reject that? Do we really have to be so stuck in our partisan encampments that we can't see that as a shakedown? by the state against the people. So let's stand up for real, if we could in this Congress, Mr. Chairman, for the freedom of speech, for the freedom of press, for the right to petition government for a redress of grievances, for the freedom of assembly, for the free exercise of a religion, and for no establishment of a religion. Let's at least converge around that. And I thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. I would just say, first of all, thank you all for being here. Just in response briefly, I'm all for getting the facts and the truth. And the way you get there is robust debate. It's the First Amendment. Ms. Crockett quoted scripture. There's a great scripture, I think it's in Proverbs. It says, the first to present his case seems right until another comes along and questions him. It's called the principle of cross-examination. That's basically the First Amendment. One person says one thing, another person says something else, and we can figure out the truth and the facts. If you're just getting one side, and again, from left or right in a political context, that's the problem. I'm for the full apple, to use your metaphor. What I know is, I don't know Mr. Aaron's background, but I know these three people, for defending the full apple, to use your metaphor again, they've been harassed for doing it. Mr. Taibbi had the IRS knock on his door, for goodness sake. He had a Democrat member of Congress threaten to refer him to the Justice Department for prosecution, for goodness sake. Mr. Schellenberger's a wanted man in Brazil for standing up for the truth, for the facts. In fact, I'm going to ask a question here. Ms. Subramanya, I know what you did during the trucker blockade. I know how you've testified. I know, my guess, I don't know specifically, my guess is you've been harassed and targeted as well for your defense of the truth and the full apple, to stick with Mr. Raskin's.
Absolutely. A few months.
And the hypocrisy he exposed left Jim Jordan completely speechless on live TV. Jordan had just finished a long lecture about what he thought real fact-checking was supposed to be in America. He said the First Amendment itself is the ultimate fact-check, not some expert sitting behind a desk, combing through posts and tweets, deciding what's accurate and what isn't. In his telling, if someone says something stupid, the way you deal with it isn't to delete it, it's to argue back. More speech, not less speech. Wrong speech, he insisted, should always be answered by right speech. False speech should be answered with true speech. That's what he said America was built on. It was the kind of fiery statement that his supporters love, filled with energy, confidence, and a tone that sounded almost untouchable. Jordan even brought up examples of what he saw as censorship, emails from the White House to Twitter asking for tweets to be taken down, specifically one from RFK Jr., who at the time was gearing up to challenge President Biden. To Jordan, that was proof that the government was silencing speech, and he stood there as if he was the lone soldier guarding the gates of free expression. But Jamie Raskin wasn't buying it for a second. He leaned in, thanked Jordan for his passion, and then delivered one of the most sarcastically brilliant compliments you'll ever hear in Congress. He called Jordan the John Stuart Mill of the House of Representatives, the Voltaire of Congress, and said Jordan put him in the mood of Justice Brandeis. The chamber laughed, but everyone knew what Raskin was doing. He was building him up, setting the stage, and then preparing to completely tear down the shaky foundation that Jordan's entire argument stood on. Raskin paused just long enough for the room to lean in, and then he dropped the question that sliced through Jordan's whole performance. Did those First Amendment principles that Jordan was so proud of extend to Donald Trump? Because if Jordan was truly the champion of free speech, then surely he would have to admit that Trump had trampled on those same freedoms while in office. Suddenly the fire in Jordan's argument didn't seem so untouchable. Raskin laid out the evidence piece by piece. Trump as President of the United States wasn't simply debating bad speech with better speech. He was suing media companies for astronomical sums of money. Raskin reminded everyone that Trump once personally sued CBS for $20 billion, not million, billion. And what was the supposed crime? Did CBS defame him? Did they lie about him? No. According to Trump, they had edited a video of Vice President Kamala Harris in a way he didn't like. That was it. The President of the United States, the man sworn to uphold the Constitution, tried to weaponize the courts against a news network because he didn't like how an interview looked in a promo clip. And that wasn't the only time. Raskin pointed out that Trump had also sued ABC, shaking them down in a separate case that ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement. It wasn't about debating ideas. It wasn't about trusting people to sort truth from lies. It was about raw power, using lawsuits to intimidate the press, silence critics, and make journalists think twice before reporting anything he didn't like. Then came the even darker part. Raskin exposed how Trump had ordered the FCC, a federal agency under his control, to go after CBS. Imagine that for a moment. The President of the United States directing government regulators to investigate a news outlet just because of how they presented him on television. Raskin made it clear, this wasn't some abstract debate about free speech, this was a sitting president actively using the machinery of government to punish speech he didn't like. And it didn't stop there. Trump's close allies were simultaneously trying to take over Paramount, one of the biggest media companies in the country, making the whole thing even more tangled. Business interests, political vendettas, government agencies, all being pulled together in one giant push to control what Americans saw and heard. By this point, the room was quiet. The bold First Amendment champion act from Jim Jordan didn't sound so strong anymore. Raskin looked straight at the Republicans across the room and asked them directly, would you be okay if Joe Biden did this? Would you stand by in silence if Biden ordered the FCC to investigate Fox News? Would you shrug if Biden sued a network for billions of dollars over a video clip? Would you be defending him if Biden told the Associated Press to leave the room because he didn't like their reporting? Everyone knew the answer, but not one of them could say it out loud. The hypocrisy was hanging in the air, and Raskin wasn't letting go. He reminded them that the First Amendment isn't a suggestion. It doesn't protect only the speech you like. It doesn't crumble just because the president is annoyed by coverage. It is supposed to stand for everyone, against every president, no matter which party they belong to. Then came a moment that cut through the tension with just the right mix of sarcasm and truth. A Democrat from Texas jumped in, pointing out the absurdity of how far the debate had drifted. She asked, can we at least agree it's the Gulf of Mexico and not the Gulf of America? It was a jab at how some in Trump's circle had tried to rewrite even the most basic facts. And when Raskin responded, he made the point clear, facts are facts. People can call it whatever they want, but punishing them for it, silencing them, or throwing them out of the room isn't free speech, it's the opposite. By the end of it, Jim Jordan had nothing left to say. The man who opened the hearing with booming confidence about the First Amendment was suddenly quiet, sitting in his chair with no comeback. Jamie Raskin had taken his argument, turned it inside out, and used Trump's own record to show just how hollow it really was. It wasn't about defending speech at all, it was about protecting power. And in that moment, broadcast live for the country to see, the double standard was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a clash of political rhetoric, it was a masterclass in exposing hypocrisy, live on the record with nowhere to hide. Raskin showed that if you're going to defend free speech, you have to defend it consistently. You can't hold it high in one hand while excusing its destruction in the other. And when that contradiction was laid bare, Jim Jordan, the self-proclaimed First Amendment warrior, was left completely speechless. So what do you think? Should the First Amendment be applied equally, even to presidents who try to silence the press, or do you think the double standard will keep being ignored?